Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1.2 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In today's episode 333, brought to you by Whipper, Australia's pack manufacturer, we talk with hikers Joe and Annie about one of Europe's best-known trails, the Tour de Mont Blanc. We hope you enjoy. If you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. Ask most hikers to name some European hiking trails, and the 170-kilometre Tour de Mont Blanc hiking trail will often crop up. This trail includes sections through France, Italy and Switzerland and circumnavigates Western Europe's highest mountain, Mont Blanc. For most hikers, this trail, which starts and finishes in the Chamonix Valley, is undertaken in around 11 days, but it can be done in a quicker or slower fashion depending on the experience that you're after. In this podcast episode, we talk to hikers Joe and Annie, who undertook this well-known European trail in August of 2025. Joe, Annie, thanks for taking the time to talk with us about your European adventure.
Delighted to be with you, Tim.
It's going to be great just sharing our experience, Tim.
Okay, now, to help provide a bit of context, give us a bit of background on your hiking experience.
Sure. Both of us love hiking. Traditionally, we like to do multi-day, challenging hikes. The ones that we've done together in Australia, simple single night out hikes like the Royal National Park. We did Uriga near Coffs Harbour, which was a multi-day hike a couple of years ago. 3 capes, of course, which was fantastic. We've done the Route Burn in New Zealand, which was gorgeous. And more recently, we did the Kumano Kodo Pilgrimage Trail in Japan.
I was going to say that's the Kumano Kodo is one we've actually done a podcast episode on before, and it's one of those ones that a lot of people tend not to know about.
It was a gorgeous hike. We did it with my 2 daughters, and we absolutely loved the experience. Joe's done a few other hikes as well that are worth mentioning.
Okay, and Joe?
Yeah, so this year in particular, I've enjoyed taking some time off work, and I've done a couple of big hikes. I did the Coast to Coast in the UK and the John Muir Trail in America.
Okay, yeah, now that's John Muir is definitely one of the ones on my list, but I don't know if I'm going anywhere near America at the moment.
Fair enough.
Okay, now on to the Tour de Mont Blanc. How did you decide to do this trail? Was it something that was always been planned? Was it a matter of convenience, or did it just come out of the blue?
We both had significant birthdays last year, so we'd done a lot of research, which was really fun. Actually, just doing the research in itself was fun. I was recovering from having had breast cancer in the previous year, and I'd had a lot of surgery. And so we chose this one because it was challenging. The scenery was absolutely gorgeous. But in particular, we wanted to choose a hike that we could do village to village and do one where we weren't carrying all of our gear. And so this one offered that opportunity.
Yeah, it's one of these sort of things. Now, my understanding with the Tour de Mont Blanc is it basically circumnavigates the Mont Blanc mountain and takes in, I think it's 3 countries, is it? Does that sound right?
That's right.
So I think now, what are we looking at here? We're looking at France, Italy and Switzerland from memory.
That's right.
Okay.
That's correct.
And the overall distance is roughly around about the 170-kilometre mark, is from what I understand.
Yeah, so it's 170 kilometres, and you're right, it circumnavigates the Mont Blanc Massif. And one of the things we found about the terrain on this walk, you're either walking up a steep mountain path or you're walking down a steep mountain path, and there's not much flat in the walk itself. And with the exception of a couple of days, you mostly stay in the valleys. A couple of days you stay up high, or we stayed up high, but every other day you find yourself walking through the valley up to a mountain pass, sometimes swapping countries, and then down to your next valley where your next accommodation is. And just to give some flavour for the sort of altitude's not an issue, but every day, it was quite a lot, quite steep. Hardest climb on any particular day was about 1.6 kilometres up and down, but we averaged about 1,100 metres up and down. So that bit made it the sort of challenging bit. The other thing that happened is we did this in August, so it was the busiest time of year, but it was also the hottest time of the year. But generally, the track's pretty easy to follow, and the typical trail is sort of a hard-packed gravel or rocky type of shale surface, which we had a beautiful dry period, so it was quite dusty in parts, but that did, on the way down, particularly in some of the steeper bits, make it a bit slippery, and it was very rocky in some of the elevated peaks.
Okay.
Yeah, you certainly needed good grip on your shoes. We both wore trail runners for it. We didn't use hiking boots. Joe had Hoka Speed Goats, and I was wearing a shoe that I'd never heard of before, to be honest, Topos, which were fantastic, so comfortable, like just an absolute joy to hike in. We both used walking poles, which were an absolute godsend. I don't think you would want to do it without hiking poles. But it's hugely rewarding. Circumnavigating Mont Blanc, it's just so rewarding as these different vistas of the mountain are revealed to you day after day. It was just gorgeous. Incredible views of both the Mont Blanc, but also the valleys below. Sometimes we're above the tree line, sometimes below. We chose to do the high variant on every occasion that was an option, because we wanted to get access to the best of the views. And we're not sure if that added much distance, but it certainly did add elevation. And occasionally that meant that parts of the day were spent scrambling up and over rocks. There were a couple of days coming back to Chamonix, which were very steep. There were a couple of days where there was some fixed ladders that you would climb. And there were 2 days where at the end of the day was completed by coming into a village that was just a very steep walk down, in one case coming down into Courmayeur, where you were really just walking down a series of ski slopes that, to be honest, were dusty, not that interesting. And so on those 2 occasions, we took the ski lift down, which was certainly saved a fair bit of pressure on the knees.
You mentioned you did this in the middle of summer. What was the temperature like when you said it was summertime in those areas?
It was. The mornings were nice and cool, but it felt like it was probably in the early 30s on some days. So it was quite hot, and obviously fatiguing from that heat. Not particularly humid, but yes, it was quite challenging from the weather perspective. Thankfully, we did not have any rain whilst we were walking. One day there was a big storm after we finished walk and were safely in our accommodation. But yeah, probably the heat was the main weather challenge that we had. Okay,
I must admit, I would have assumed it would have been hot, but I wouldn't have assumed it would be as hot as you just described. So now what was the reason for doing the walk at that time of the year? Did you specifically choose that time, or that was just happened to be the most convenient time for you?
It was somebody's significant birthday as we started the hike.
Okay. All right. No, that's fair enough. I must admit, I try and avoid the middle of the summer wherever I am in the world. But as you say, very little rain, that's probably not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, it was surprising, though, because 2 weeks after we finished the trek, we enjoyed watching or following the ultimate Tour de Mont Blanc, which is the ultra marathon that does the same route, but they run it in something like the winner does it in 22 hours.
Yep.
And as we watched it, we saw the temperatures were almost down to low digit temperatures, and it was raining and sleeting. So I guess we just got a hot spell.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. All right, now Vegetation. I have a picture in my mind about what this area looks like, but it might be totally wrong. So tell us a bit about the vegetation profile. Was it the same over the whole trip or did it vary?
Mostly it was fairly predictable. Once you got out of the tree line, which you did fairly quickly, you were pretty sparse vegetation, mountain views, had magnificent views of Mont Blanc from a different perspective every day. And when you were beneath a certain altitude, sometimes it was wooded and shady, which was a godsend in that heat. But most of the time it was pretty exposed. And the other thing I should say is the wind was very kind to us. We did not have strong wind, so that wasn't a factor that we were trying to beat down.
Okay. And I was going to say, still on the weather side of things, what were the coldest temperatures you had?
It wasn't that cold, but it certainly did require, a bit of warm clothing at night if we were walking around towns. I guess it would have got down to 8, 9, 10 degrees sometimes. But probably for the most of the experience that we had, it was quite hot at night. And we'll go on to talk about accommodation, etc. But none of the places that we stayed in sort of local hotels, had air conditioning. So that was probably a factor during the evenings. It was a bit too hot and not much wind to cool you down.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is always the thing. Sometimes you get these climates where you can get the 30 degrees during the daytime and almost sub-zero temperatures at night. So, it's always interesting to see what it's like. And as you say, you had a good time and you picked a good time of the year.
Mm.
Now, did you find any major difference landscape-wise when changing countries, or it was very similar on and off throughout the trip?
The landscape was pretty consistent. It's very much sort of this European alpine environment, very beautiful, but relatively consistent as we changed countries, which you just do really seamlessly. You get to the top of the pass, and with a footstep, you leave France and walk into Italy. The main thing that made us laugh at the time was that we were surrounded, as you were walking up the pass, you'd be saying hello to people and saying bonjour, bonjour, to everybody who you assumed were native French speakers because they're all saying bonjour so beautifully. And then as you step into Italy, all the same people start saying bonjour, bonjour, as you pass them on the path, and you realise, oh, A, now we're in Italy, and B, the people around us are not any more Italian or French perhaps than we are, or maybe they are, but the strength of their accent is no indication.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. You mentioned that you were staying in towns from an accommodation perspective. Was this a carry everything sort of trip, or did you forward some gear from town to town as you went?
Yeah, one of the things we decided to do because of any described sort of needing to recover and get fit after surgery, is we chose to just carry a day pack and therefore looked at doing this, and we eventually booked through Max Adventures, which is a travel company that makes it so easy. They organise everything and set that up. So they booked all our accommodation, and every morning we just dropped off the luggage and they transported it to the next hotel. So it was super easy from that point of view. They organised breakfast at each accommodation, evening meals at accommodation, provided lunch most days, and then during the day there were these beautiful areas to stop at, the refugios that you stopped at on mountain passes, seemingly in the middle of nowhere, where you could stock up and have a coffee, have a cup of tea, and there was water taps en route as well. So we didn't really need to carry that much, which was great. The only thing we carried along during the day beyond food and water were rain jackets and pants, which we ended up not needing.
I was going to say, it's always the way that when you don't take them, it pours with rain and you're stuck with it.
Yeah.
We did laugh. We had all of our gear was ultralight. So Joe carried our day pack, which had our ultralight rain gear, which, as you say, we did not use. But the pack itself was ultralight. So Joe was carrying that, and I actually just literally had a bum bag that I was carrying, just the 600 ml of water in. I didn't carry anything any more than that. So if Joe was ultralight, I was ultra light. The Max app, though, it is worth mentioning. The Max Adventures app was fantastic. You sort of, on the hike, at times you'd stop with other hikers and compare who was using what technology to keep themselves on track. And certainly the Max Adventures app was fantastic in terms of it seemed to be better than All Trails was in terms of keeping you on the most scenic routes. We could download it prior, so if you didn't have signal, it was still useful to you. It gave you options for different variants, so you could choose. As Joe mentioned, we consistently chose the high variant every time, but you could choose much easier variants if you wanted to, or if somebody was feeling particularly tired on a particular day, and it gave you real-time position tracking, so it just made it impossible to get lost.
That's always handy. It means that, if you think, am I 2 hours away from my accommodation or am I 6? And it's nice to know, just so you don't have to rush or start worrying about where you are.
Mm. And the other good feature about this particular one, we've used all sorts in the past. All Trails is one we're both familiar. This one also gave gradients, so you could look at your day and look at the altitude through an elevation graph through the day. And I guess our experience was this particular way of navigating seemed to be a lot more accurate. It pinpointed where you were, and therefore you could make decisions and, as you say, know how long you were to the next coffee stop or end of day.
Yeah, no, that is fairly handy. I'm used to using Atlas guides, and again, that's a similar sort of app where it gives you the distance from your last accommodation to your next, and tells you and shows you where you are on the trail, and that's a handy feature to have, with whatever app you are using.
Absolutely.
What sort of accommodation were you actually staying in? Was this homestays or hotels or huts, or a bit of a combination?
It was mainly hotels, sort of European 3-star hotels. And one of the nice features about that was they were all independent, and a lot were family owned. And you got a sense. And one of the things that was very nice was when you went in and checked into your accommodation at the end of the day's walking, very welcoming. They understood what you were doing and more than helpful in terms of any explainers about the town and what to see, et cetera. And they knew what you were about, if that makes sense, in terms of you've had a day's walking and want to have an early dinner and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's good. Now, was speaking of dinner, was that included as part of the deal, or you did what you wanted to with dinner?
Yes, I think most nights dinner was included. There may have been a couple of nights in the bigger towns where you just made your own way because there was plenty of choices, but most nights dinner was included. A couple of the accommodation, they were mostly hotels. There were these refugios that you could stay in, and I think we stayed in only one of those, and that was on a mountain pass. And on that particular night, everybody ate in a communal dining room. So there was a real sense of camaraderie as you got together that night and told stories about the day, et cetera.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm used to the Swiss refugios, and again, it was really wonderful. Except I don't know about you guys. There were some private rooms, but we stayed in a share room with sort of 20 other people, and I'm a snorer and. Strangely enough, other people snoring annoy me. So,
we won't tell any stories, Tim. Neither of us about our snoring capabilities. But the refugio was quite funny. It was very communal. But one of the things that stood out to us, it was lovely. But you got this coin as you checked in for a shower, and you line up, you put your coin in. And I think we got about 20 seconds of hot water each on that particular day. So that was the biggest hardship we had, if you can call that hardship. But the accommodation throughout was just, truly local, really friendly, and most of the time you're pretty tired and you have a good night's sleep anyway.
Now you have to say, I think the accommodation was a real highlight of the trip, because you'd wake up in the morning and the breakfast, they'd have a buffet breakfast everywhere we stayed that would be really protein rich, so lots of eggs and cheese and meat and things that you could have a really big full breakfast. Then we'd get on the trail, stop at these beautiful cafes along the way and have coffee and cake and things along the trail. They would have packed, as Joe mentioned, a lunch for us, which were beautiful baguettes. And often you have a bunch of snacks packed with your lunch again. So you had heaps of food all day and then heaps of places to stop where you could get fresh water as you went. And then, as Joe mentioned, we'd get in at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You could check into a hotel that knew why you were there and what you were about, have a hot shower, have time for an Aperol spritz in the sunshine, little wander around whatever village you were in, beautiful big meals that were lots of, big bowls of pasta and those sort of things, which were exactly what you felt like. And then everyone was in bed very early, jumping up the next morning to do it all over again. The accommodation was a real highlight.
Okay, no, that's good. How did you manage food on this trip? So, by the sound of it, some meals were included, but did you have to bring your own lunches, or were lunches also provided?
No, most days you had an option to have a packed lunch, which we took up, and so that was good. You really didn't need much. On a couple of occasions when you're in towns, we bought our own lunch. I would say, though, that was good, but even though we talk about places to stop, you could buy food at the refugios, but there were a couple of days where your options for buying things on trail were not great because you were pretty remote going up mountain passes.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, the reason why they offer that service of packing your own lunch.
Okay. Now, I'll throw in an extra question through here, so I'll get Annie to answer this one. How many days did you do this? Does this trip take you? And did you have the option of going fast or slowing it down if you wanted to?
Yeah, you absolutely did have the option of slowing it down if you wanted to. We did it over 10 days, and on day 2 we took the longer, harder variant. And realised that in doing so, we'd actually walked 2 days' worth of walking in one, which meant we accidentally had 2 rest days in Courmayeur. Well, we thought we were only going to have 1 rest day, but that's not a hardship. Courmayeur was just a gorgeous, gorgeous little village, and it was delightful. To be honest, having been on the trail only for a couple of days, we thought having even 1, let alone 2 rest days, might be a bit too early in the trip. But to be honest, it was, at least for mine, perfect because my legs were a bit sore after that really big day. And so it was lovely to be able to just enjoy the scenery. It was a very beautiful little village, but also to have a couple of rest days. We did some yoga, had some swims, had some really lovely times there, beautiful meals before getting back on the trail. Again, the great thing was every morning you could make a different decision on did you want to take a high variant or a low variant and then therefore pick an easier day if you needed to. And in fact, if people got injured or for whatever reason didn't want to hike a day, there was an option that you could jump in a taxi with the bags and get taxied to your next accommodation if for some reason you weren't in a state to walk. We weren't aware of anyone doing that when we were there, but I'd had a couple of family members who had done the hike in the previous year, and a member of the family had become injured and so had some days where she went with the bags and apparently had a lovely time. So even in the worst case, that did mean that it was still a lovely trip, at least in her case.
Okay, and just while I think about it as well, did you need to be able to speak French, Italian, Swiss at all, or everyone was quite comfortable with English?
Everybody was comfortable with English. Always, everybody was, however, very welcoming and enthusiastic about our efforts to speak French and Italian in particular. At the end of the walk, we then also went on to Zurich and found that we also needed to pull out our school German, which we were less successful with, you'd have to say. But certainly our French and our Italian were good enough to get us by, and everybody was very welcoming and positive about our efforts.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, I think particularly the Tour de Mont Blanc, I think it's probably a mainstream, well-recognised walk, so people to be used to tourists. But the Hexa track, which is the new big track through France, I know you are going in areas of France where people do not speak English at all, and that's where you need to have some ability to translate somehow. All right. Now, what gear did you bring on your walk? So you were by the sound of it, you pretty much sent any clothing and other stuff through. But so you were using trail runners, you're using trekking poles. Was there anything in particular that you brought that was helpful?
Yeah, probably beyond those two, and everyone was using hiking poles, and which and he said made it a lot easier, particularly on those steep downhill bits. The trail runners, as most people would know, that they're super light, they're super comfortable, and if you find one with a good tread, just make it very easy. We had a pretty light pack, a sort of an ultralight pack type of thing that I'd picked up earlier in the year, which was good. But beyond that, we really didn't need much else. The only other thing I'd say which would be useful was we bought, with the sun, we had good sun protection. So we both wore sun hoodies for some time during the trip, long sleeve, and we both wore sun gloves, which we'd done a bit of research for a previous hike. And that was helpful, sort of keeping that exposure down. Both wore lightweight peaked caps or caps to keep the sun off our face, and we hiked in hiking shorts. So we didn't carry much, we didn't need much, and that was an extremely comfortable way of doing it.
Okay, no, that's good. That's good. Now, you said you did this trip over, 10 days, and the trip's 170 kilometres, so that would roughly mean about 17 kilometres per day. Now, that doesn't always work out. I'm sure the Europeans don't space their towns exactly at 17 kilometres. So take us through a typical day from getting up in the morning to the end of the day.
Yeah, so we got up and left by about 8 o'clock. And to be honest with you, the mornings were the nicest part of the day because it was nice and cool, and if you're in a valley, there was good shade. The only thing that constrained us going earlier, if we wanted to, was the time of the breakfast.
Yeah.
Sometimes the breakfast wasn't until 7:30 or something. So we generally got going by about 8. Breakfast was good. You drop your bags off in the lobby for them to be picked up, and then we headed out the door for the day. We weren't rushed by any extent of time. We would take lots of breaks. We stopped at the cafes and refugios along the way, which is a gorgeous part of the trail. And most days we would finish by mid-afternoon, say 3 o'clock, sometimes earlier on shorter days, so you could relax in the afternoon. As you're right, the towns weren't spaced equally. Our longest day was 21 kilometres, and the highest altitude gain that we had was 1,600 metres up and then down again. The shortest altitude, the lowest altitude we had was about 450 metres, and that certainly felt like a lot easier day when we did that. So that was a typical day. Plenty of time to do it because, if you are travelling 17 kilometres, it generally that would take maybe 4 or 5 hours walking, depending on that. So there's plenty of time if you're leaving by 8, plus stops. So we found it a very leisurely pace all the way through the trail.
Now, when you went through and booked your trip with Max, and I'll talk more specifically about the booking in a moment, did you have the option of saying, look, I want to do an 8-day trip or a 10-day trip or a 12-day trip, or they just said, look, this is what we recommend?
No, good question. You had a choice. You could do it. They recommended that I think the average was maybe 12 days. But you could book it for 15, 16 if you wanted. You could have plenty of days in a certain town, one of the bigger towns. So it was very flexible through that period. The only thing I would say is, given that we went in August, we booked this pretty early in the year. I think we might have booked it in January. So we gave ourselves plenty of time to book it. And our feeling was that we were glad we did it then because it was sort of booked out. And on the trail, the accommodation was busy. The towns are busy. Because the other thing about the walk is a lot of people are doing the whole circuit, but a lot of people are doing day walks and a lot of people are doing just coming to the town and visiting. So booking ahead was really important.
Right. So if you had have just winged it and walked as you went, you ran the risk of struggling for accommodation or having to spend a bit of time searching for it?
Definitely. Yeah, I don't think you would be able to do the walk without having pre-booked your accommodation unless you were assuming that you'd be camping. Now, there were a lot of people, as you sort of got to know people out on the trail, there were a lot of people who were camping, and it would be completely possible to camp, and or people who were carrying all their gear, so they weren't getting their bags transferred. And so certainly you'd see many people who would be hiking with really quite big packs, and not everyone with ultralight gear. So you'd see people doing, really carrying significant weight. And again, at 17 Ks a day, that's not a particularly long day. Certainly if we compare it to the other hikes that we would traditionally do, for us that's a pretty short day. But it is more elevation coming both up and down than most hikes that we do would generally get done in a day. And that's where you could really see it taking a toll, particularly on the high variants.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I think that's the thing. Distance is one thing, but when you add elevation in there, 17 kilometres dead flat, it's pretty easy. 17 kilometres with elevation, that certainly does make a difference.
Absolutely.
Now, I was going to say, food-wise, what's the question I'm going to ask you? Food-wise, what were you typically eating? You mentioned pasta before. Was it what you'd class as typical European food, or did they go heavy on the carbs, particularly because you were hikers?
Yeah, they were high-protein breakfasts, and so we would make a point of having at least a 2-course breakfast, sometimes a 3-course breakfast. As I mentioned, the eggs, meat, cheese. They'd have beautiful mueslis and yogurt, as well as pastries. So you could really eat really well at breakfast time. Lunches were always a beautiful baguette, and we sort of would on a daily basis have a long discussion about whether this baguette was the best of the trip. They did certainly feel like they just got better and better, and as a baguette always does when you've done a hard morning of walking up a mountain path. It tastes amazing. And then the evenings, as we mentioned, they were usually big pasta meals or slow cooked sort of casserole type meals. But again, they would be multi-course meals. I think in every place we stayed, the dinner was an entree, main, and a dessert. And so the food, there was certainly no lack of, really beautiful food.
No, that's good. And I think for a lot of people, European food is, we're used to that style of food. So I think most people would be probably quite happy with how you've described it.
Yes, and then there were added bonuses in snacks. So these refugios had beautiful cakes that they made. And that was lovely. And in the towns, we certainly enjoyed having a local gelato on a few occasions. So there was the food certainly wasn't a challenge.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Now, from a logistical perspective, you said you went with Max, and Max seemed to have a good reputation throughout Europe. How easy was it actually getting to Chamonix? So Chamonix was your start and your finish point, was it?
Yeah, it was. Well, we came into Chamonix. We actually started the walk in La Houche. But yeah, so we flew into Geneva, and we met in Geneva and had a couple of days in Geneva just to get into time zone. And then it was about an hour and a half bus ride from Geneva in Switzerland to Chamonix, which is in France. And so again, you're driving straight through a border crossing, which was unremarkable in every sense. And then we stayed in Chamonix for a night and then circled back to La Houche, which is the official start, if you like, of the hike. Other people start the hike in Chamonix, but we started at the traditional beginning where there's this arch, which is the iconic picture that everybody who does the hike tends to have a photo of themselves under this arch. But it was very easy. At the end of the hike, we then departed again back out of Chamonix, catching a bus back down to Geneva, and actually got a car to take us onward to Zurich. Thank you.
Back to Zurich. Yeah, and the other thing, the Hoosh start point, as Annie said, it's quite iconic for where it starts with a photo opportunity. If you are hard and fast, I've got to do all the trail, you would walk up that first mountain but we certainly joined everybody else taking a chairlift up to the start because it would have been a pretty tough introduction to day one. And one of the things we learned on the track was we were quite relaxed about when it wasn't going to be too scenic or whether it was going to be just steep downhill and not much fun without any scenery. There was a chairlift option, and we certainly took that.
No, that's fair enough. It's fair enough. Now, if you don't mind me asking, what was the price of the trip?
That's a very good question, and we were asking ourselves before. One of the things that we have decided is it feels free because you pay for it way back in January.
Yeah.
The cost has disappeared from my mind. What we would say, though, and we can find it and come back to you, Ken, but what we would say is we found it probably the most economical because everything is organised and everything's in front of you. Certainly with the accommodation, I remember looking at the pricing of accommodation when we were there and trying to compare that to what I think we paid in the package. And I think we got pretty good value. You pay a little bit extra because of that certainty of bag transfers, etc. But we found it value for money because everything was organised, and as I say, by the time you got there, it felt as though the pain of paying was a long way behind you.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I mean, it's one of these sort of things. I mean, obviously, if you camp, and provide your own food and do all that sort of thing, the trip is cheaper. But it depends on the experience you want and the ability and any other factor you think is important at the time.
Well, as I joke with Annie on a couple of my hikes, when I had invested in ultralight gear, my first night in a tent, having bought all the ultralight gear, was a mere $8,000. But thankfully, I've amortised that over a period of time. But this one, I think we made the decision to go and book this through Max. I'm glad we did, because I think the other experience that we've heard others talk about is because you don't know exactly. Chamonix is quite a big town, and you can book in a place that is on the outskirts of town, that's not that accessible, or have that experience where you are adding a few kilometres onto the trail because you just get into the trailhead. So I think that local knowledge of a provider, and Max is just one of the providers that they have, as many, was well worth it for us.
No, that's fair enough. Whipper is an Australian designer and manufacturer of ultralight packs based in the Blue Mountains town of Katoomba, and manufactures the best purpose-built performance packs for use in hiking, mountaineering, climbing and canyoning. Leveraging Australian design and manufacturing experience built up since 1981, Whipper uses the most advanced materials available with a minimalist approach that ensures every element serves a purpose. In doing so, they strip away the unnecessary to focus on what truly matters, which is functionality, durability, comfort and performance, to create packs that, in Whipper's words, are lighter, stronger and better. So if you want to experience your ultimate hiking adventure, then get yourself a Whipper Ultralight Performance Pack designed and built in Katoomba, Australia. So what was the people interaction like on this trip, both with other hikers and also with locals?
Okay, so one of the main things that we might have been concerned about in booking the hike was there were perhaps too many people. We went in August, as we say, that was the most popular time of year to do the hike. So we had a slight concern it would be too busy, too packed. However, what we found was on the hike, when people gathered, it was more at rest points and more at the refugios for rest and so on, and that added a nice, warm, friendly atmosphere to the whole place. So we didn't really find it being too challenging in terms of too many people. Certainly there were lots of hikers from outside of Europe. We met a number of groups that were people from America. We only came across 2 other Australian families that were doing it. There's a couple from New Zealand. There were people from China that were doing the hike as well. So there were, lots of different types of people. I'd say though the majority of the people doing the hike were from Europe, and a lot from Italy, Switzerland, and France.
I think actually the fact that it was fairly crowded almost went from a real negative in our minds because we traditionally don't like to do hikes where there's a lot of people. And so we really did going in, we did see that as one of the potential negatives of this hike. But the actual experience of it, in retrospect, I actually think was a real positive of the hike. It was actually quite social. Again, we were doing it independently. We weren't in a group. But because you're staying in similar accommodation, you're not in the same place with the same people every night, but you do see the same people from time to time as you progress along the walk. And as Joe mentioned, everything from 20-something Americans all the way through to an American couple from Minnesota in their 60s. And the social interaction with them was actually a real positive of the trip. And it also helped on the one occasion where we did become separated from each other. We were on a stretch of the hike where we had no mobile phone signal and got separated from each other and didn't know who was in front. And so neither of us knew whether to speed up or slow down to find the other person. And it was actually great that on that occasion I ran into a couple that we'd met on numerous occasions and said to them, "Have you seen Joe?" And they said, "Yep, he's ahead of you. You'll need to speed up." Fantastic. So that was great, really reassuring. So it was actually a real plus of the trip, to be honest.
Now, that raises a question. Were you hiking together all the time, or did you separate for periods of the day and catch up at certain times?
We noticed that we were with another couple that we sort of saw from time to time, and they did a lot separately. So he would always take the high variant, and she often didn't, and they found that worked really well for them. For us, we did hike together. We didn't, there was only one occasion, as I mentioned, where we accidentally got separated, but we otherwise did do the whole hike together. But you wouldn't need to if you didn't want to. Again, there was another American pair of friends, a couple of women, and again, they hiked actually quite separately, but then we're always in the same accommodation every night. So you could do it together or separately.
No, that's fair enough. And the staff, you mentioned the staff of the hotels were really friendly. So it sounds like the locals are all pretty good.
They were great. The accommodation that we were staying in was all independently, mostly family owned. One of the hotels we stayed in had been in the same family for over 100 years. The couple running it were now the fourth generation to be running it. And again, they were a real plus of the trip. They were, the accommodation was all really different, sometimes a bit quirky, but always really warm welcomes when you got there at the end of the day. And it was really fit for purpose. Clean rooms, comfortable beds, great food, exactly what you needed. Not an inch more, but exactly what you needed.
One thing I wouldn't expect on this trail is animals, apart from farm animals. Was it pretty minimal with animals and mainly birds, or what was your experience there?
Yeah, it was. We had heard quite a lot about the alpine ibexes,
yep,
particularly around Chamonix, but we did not see one of them. We heard about marmots, which I'd experienced before on other trails. Didn't see any. So to be honest, there wasn't a lot of wildlife. The most abundant animal were cows.
Yep.
And that sort of famous, beautiful sound of a bell ringing on a cow became quite a crescendo of noise as you travelled through the villages and alpine passes. In fact, one day we were walking along the trail, and there was a herd of cows wanting to go from one side of the trail to the other, and we found ourselves in the middle of this herd of cows, which was quite confronting because they're not even sure. You're not even sure if they know you're there. So that I remember that as quite a moment of this could be a bit dangerous. So lots of cows, but that was the most common animal that we saw.
And bird life? Any much bird life at all?
Not a lot, to be honest. There was a few what we thought were eagles that we saw, but not a whole lot, and not too much bird song either on the trail.
Yeah, I suppose particularly if you are above tree line, there's probably going to be a limitation there to a great extent.
Yes, yeah.
So now, what were the highlights overall for the trip?
For me, the stunning scenery. Every single day you just had superb scenery, which was certainly aided by the superb weather. The visibility was very, very good. The other thing I loved was the different perspectives of Mont Blanc as you circumnavigated it. So going round the whole massif, you have this number of days where you're going down one side, you have the experience at both ends, and then obviously on the other side. So that was really good because every day you had this sense of purpose and journey as you circumnavigated the whole mountain.
Yeah, I think you've put that perfectly. In addition to that, just walking into a village each night, into a different town, a lovely local hotel. That was another really lovely part of the trip. And then there were two others that were less expected as big highlights of the trip. One I've already mentioned, which was the social dimension of it. It was really fun, meeting different people from all around the world and seeing them from time to time along the trail. That was something that we didn't expect to really enjoy on the trail. And then the other one is the fact that, as Joe mentioned, the UTMB, the Ultra, was being run the week after we finished our hike. And so what took us 10 days to hike took these incredible athletes, as little as 22 hours to run. And so it was just an absolute joy to see them out on the trail getting ready for the event. These people who are just the most extraordinary athletes as you're scrambling up what seems like an endless mountain, seeing people from all around the world running past you as they do it, or even more incredibly, running down the mountain past you like mountain goats. They're just extraordinary athletes. And that was a real bonus while we were there. I ended up buying a book that talks a lot about the history of the UTMB. And it was just fascinating to understand that very extreme sport event a little bit better and the community that's built up around it.
No, that's fair enough. And then on the other side of the coin, were there any negatives on this trip for you?
No negatives, but you do need to be match fit. We both spent a lot of time making sure that we were physically ready for it because we knew that would be the big thing that would really unlock our pleasure in the trip, to make sure that we were physically ready for it. The weather was really kind to us, but if you were doing it in solid rain, as we can see as we were, we became members of various Facebook groups associated with the hike, we could see both before us and after us, people's hikes were really significantly impacted by rain and in some cases snow, and we could see how that would make it a really different experience.
So, as Annie said, there were no negatives, but our advice would be you need to sort of be match fit and train for it. And by that, it's just getting your legs in shape to do all that walking. We had one day where we were coming out of Common Year where we had stayed for a couple of nights. And after walking up a very steep track on a very hot day for about 4 hours, we saw a rescue helicopter ahead of us dropping off gear and people to a certain point. And when we got to that spot, we saw that a hiker had to have medical attention. He had some sort of medical episode. Emergency workers were on the scene and intubated him. But unfortunately, it became clear to us that he actually passed away on the trail. And that was really sobering. The individual looked to us. We sort of recognised him from earlier in the day when he passed us. He looked fairly young. Our guess was mid-30s. So we assumed that he had a heart attack or similar. And yes, it was a pretty sobering part of the trek, and that can happen to anybody, I guess. But it was just a reminder that you wouldn't want to do this if you weren't trained and prepared to put in the hard yards. And you also need to pace yourself as well. We took our time walking. We didn't sort of push it too much.
No, I think that's the thing. I mean, you need to know your limits and know your fitness levels, and while it's good to push a tiny bit, there's a limit to how much you can actually do in covers. So, it's a rarity, but things like that do happen from time to time. So now, how did you find Switzerland, Europe, and Italy as a general tourist destination?
Fantastic. wonderfully organised, absolutely drop dead gorgeous. It was expensive, so we were glad actually that we'd done it, that we'd had it organised and pre-booked for us, because that did bring down the costs to some extent. And as Joe said, if you book it far enough in advance, by the time you get there, it does feel free, which helps.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Now, after doing this walk, who would you say it's suitable for?
A big takeaway and our experience on the trail was it can be for everybody. We had the experience where we thought that most people were at a stage in their life where they were able to devote time to travel. So there were probably predominantly older people in perhaps early retirement that had taken some time out. Having said that, we met several 20-somethings who were doing this trip at that time in their life where they could peel away from work or just prior to settling down with family and career, do that walk. So everybody, I would recommend everybody can do it. Again, it's just the advice in don't push yourself, take your time, because you do have the time to do that. There's a lot of daylight hours. You don't need to push yourself. You can take it slowly. But you do need to train for it and put in those hikes before you start.
Yeah, no, I think...
And the other thing is, I was going to go on to say, our experiences, I guess, was you don't need a lot of experience to do the actual hike in terms of navigating and understanding how to go about it, because there's plenty of people out there. It is really hard to get lost because there are people everywhere, and hard copy maps or digital maps are available, and navigation is super easy.
And that's actually something I haven't asked you. Were there signposts everywhere, or it was just really obvious where you were supposed to be going?
There were always signposts, but there were occasions where the app would tell us to do something different to what the signpost was saying, and we always believed the app, and we're really glad that we did. We noticed on a couple of occasions the signpost took you to a version of the walk, for example, that would just take you down to walk down beside a road, whereas if we followed the app, it was taking you on a more scenic trail. And so, again, if you did it without the app, you'd be fine. You're not going to get lost. But the app actually really did improve our experience, we think. But yeah, it certainly is very well signposted, both in terms of where to go, but also your elevation as you pass different mountain passes. There was always a sign telling you the elevation that you were at and what path you were at, which was great.
That's good. That's good. So one final question. What's your next great hiking adventure?
Well, there's so much to choose from, isn't there? One of the things that we both enjoy listening to is your podcast that whets the appetite on lots of trails in Australia and overseas. And, our list is longer than we can actually physically get around to. So lots to choose from around Australia. Particularly, we're quite keen on Tasmania and Victoria, New South Wales. And we've got some longer term ones that we're having a look at overseas on the do list if we can get round to them. There's a beautiful trail in Iceland called the Laugaviga in Iceland. There's a new Swedish archipelago trail. I'm not sure if you've heard of that one, but apparently that's just opened up. And for me, having familiarity with the John Muir, I'd love to go back to that part of the world and do the Lake Tahoe trail, which is circumnavigating Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, no, there are, as you say, there are so many good trips. I don't think I don't expect to be going anywhere soon, but I don't think I'm going to have enough time in my life left to do all the trails I want to do. So I'm going to have to be selective, I think.
Not a bad problem to have.
Okay, so we've been talking with Joe and Annie about hiking the Tour de Mont Blanc. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us about this well-known walk.
We love talking to you, Tim. What a privilege and a joy to be able to remember such a great trip. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No worries. So that was our interview with Joe and Annie on their European adventure on the Mont Blanc walk that they did earlier this year. As I said in the introduction, if you asked a lot of hikers and probably a lot of non-hikers hikes that they'll name in Europe, the Tour de Mont Blanc is probably one of the ones that will come up. This is one of these sort of trails that I suppose it fits into the iconic class. There's a lot of other well-known walks, but this is one of those ones that, as I said, it's probably on a lot of people's bucket lists, and certainly it's one that we'd like to do as well. Just some of the key things that were raised in that interview, gear-wise, certainly they are both using trail runners and tracking poles. And I think because they were basically doing, I suppose the best way to class it is an assisted walk where the bulk of their luggage was being transferred the next day, and really they were just having to carry what they needed for the day with them. So Annie was carrying very little. She just had a bum bag, and Joe was carrying whatever gear they needed, like rain jackets and food and snacks for the day. So it's a good way to do this walk, and you've got the ability to do this walk fully supported or fully solo, if you like. So I know they did say that they'd booked this walk in January last year and they did the walk in August, and they realised that had they have just winged it and just tried to turn up for accommodation, they might have been a bit of a struggle. But they did say they were coming across people that were doing this as a camping perspective, and certainly that's an option you can go through and do. So this is very much a choose your own adventure. They were carrying pretty much their day gear and then staying in accommodation, but they were also coming across hikers who were carrying full packs and everything needed for the trip in one go, and as well as people doing the same thing that they were as well. So I have actually provided the link to Max Adventures, who they went through, and in looking at the Tour de Mont Blanc options, you can stay in the hotels, you can stay in the refugios, the cabins, the managed cabins, or you can go through in tent. So really the options are there. The other thing they were saying about this walk is whenever they are presented with a choice of going straight ahead or down the lower pathway or taking the upper or high route, they chose the high route. Now, that's really up to the individuals, but they did say the biggest day they had about 1,600 metres change in altitude throughout the day. But yeah, you've got that choice. So if you're not feeling crash hot on the day, you can pick the easier route. If you've got the fitness in and you want to get the views, which is what this walk is about, then you've got the choice of going up high to see what's there. They really did sound like they had very good luck on this walk. It was in summertime, or towards the end of summer, they were doing the walk, and they had temperatures as high as in the low 30s. That's Celsius, not Fahrenheit. And they had very little rain, whereas people who they'd talked to who'd done the walk previously at different times of the year had constant rain. So that's really is potluck. You can get rain at any time of the year, but the experience you have is going to vary depending on what the weather conditions are like. They were saying that water was fairly easy to pick up. Both, they're carrying water from their accommodation in the morning, but they could pick up water throughout the day. So that makes things nice and easy. And food options, and again, they pretty much had their food catered for. So their breakfasts were provided at the accommodation. Not all dinners were provided. And again, particularly in the bigger towns that they were staying in, you might want to go out to a restaurant at night time. So you can virtually work out what your plans are. And they said they typically had their lunch and their daily snacks provided from the accommodation before they actually left the accommodation in the morning. And that sort of brings up another thing. With Europe and the UK, you'll find that if you're getting breakfast provided, you really do need to fit in with what the accommodation is doing. So in my case, I typically like to leave camp by roughly about 7:30 at the latest. But if you're going through and doing a European trip where breakfast is being provided, quite often the breakfast might not be till 8 or 8:30. And then by the time you have breakfast, you'd probably be best to actually pack before you actually had breakfast and just do your teeth and you're right to go. But that's going to be the limit on when you can actually start your walk. They did also say that if people are having injury or health issues and they can't do the walk, they can pretty much get a taxi on to the next destination. And they said they came across people who had done that, and while their partners or their hiking group was actually going through and doing the walk. And it means that they meet up at the end of the day, they have the experience, they can tourist around town. So again, this is a good walk for just about anyone who wants to choose to do it in the way that suits them. The other piece of gear that they were carrying was sun hoodie and sun gloves, and surprisingly enough, the contradiction is they were hiking in shorts. Now, if you are used to hiking at altitude, you do tend to realize that if you are used to hiking at altitude, you soon realize that the UV is much stronger. Sunburn is very easy to pick up. And if you're using tracking poles, it's not unusual to get the back of your hands and the tops of your hands burnt. So really, it's one of these sort of things that it's been a long time since I've worn shorts hiking. Really, it's long pants and a long sleeve shirt, and I'll wear one or two buffs, normally one around the neck and one on the head to keep myself from being sunburned, or I'll wear a broad-brimmed hat to keep the sun burnt down. But it is so easy to get sunburned at altitude. So again, definitely worth keeping that in mind when you're choosing the gear for this sort of trip. They were saying that the mornings were the nicest part of the day. Again, that's because it's a bit cooler. It's very easy to warm up by putting an extra layer on. It's a bit hard to cool down. So for me, that's one of my reasons for starting early in the morning. And they did say, as I mentioned before, that the constraint was based on the time of breakfast, how early they could leave. Their biggest day was 21 kilometres, and they did this trip in 10 days. Now, 170 kilometres, 10-day trip means they're going to average 17 kilometres. Now, the towns aren't equally spread 17 kilometres apart, so some days are shorter, some days are longer. But it's a doable sort of distance. For most people who are avid hikers and regular hikers and have the fitness, that average of 17 kilometres is not overly difficult. And if need be, if you think you want to take things a bit easier, you can have a couple of extra rest days, or if you want to do it a bit quicker, you can also do it in a shorter period. And that's something you can have a discussion with you if you are booking all the logistics. You can go through and map that out so you design a trip that is suited to what you need and want to do. Food, now European food, which as Australians we should be pretty much used to. They said they tended to have a high protein breakfast to load themselves up during the daytime. You're going to be used to the food that you're going to get in Switzerland, Italy and France. And again, it's all going to be similar sorts of food. But they said the food was there and there was plenty of it. And that's the thing with hiking. If you feel well fed, nothing else seems to worry you too much. This is a European hike, and it's not like Australia where you get the wild animals wandering around the place. I had the expectation before I interviewed Joe and Annie that they were not going to be listing animals high on the list of things for this trip. And they said there were ibex that were supposed to be in the areas they were hiking in, but they didn't actually see any. So it's typically a well-settled area. Really, it's going to be farm animals, and that's about it. The key things for them, or the key bonuses of this walk, were the scenery, and they said the different perspectives of Mont Blanc. So as you were walking around this mountain, one of the best known mountains in Europe, you were getting different views. You were looking down into the valleys. And if you go through and have a look at the show notes for this walk, if you haven't already done so, they've given me a selection of photos from their trip. Typical valley altitude hiking, I suppose. The cover image I've used is through one of the forested areas, but a lot of the walks would have been open valleys and open peaks. And again, just getting the views across a reasonably tall series of mountains, which from an Australian perspective is much, much taller than what we're used to. The other thing they said that surprised them was the social dimension, that people were friendly, both the people who were living and working in the area as well as the other hikers as well. So again, they said they came across all sorts of people from all sorts of different walks of life. And they said, particularly the locals were being really helpful. They obviously value having the tourists coming into the area and look after them really well. Key takeaway that they came across for this walk was that you need to be fit, particularly given the altitude changes and the fact they were choosing to do the high altitude options when they went. So it's one of these sort of things, whatever hike you do, whether it's, in this case here, it's a 10-day hike, or you do a 2-day hike, or you do a 6-week hike, it really doesn't matter. You want to be fit to go through and do the distances you have planned and to back that up day after day. I think most hikers, providing they've got a reasonable level of fitness, can do 1 or 2 days of 17 to 21 kilometres, but can you keep on doing this for a 10-day period? And they did have rest days in there as well. They said their biggest day, which was 21 kilometres and 1,600 metres of ascent and descent, they said they ended up doing 2 days worth. So they ended up having 2 days at one particular location, and they were quite happy about that. So I think, as I said, this is one of the walks on my bucket list. It's not a particularly remote hike. It's more about taking in Central Europe and getting the scenery around one of Europe's best-known mountains. So just to wrap up on this walk, the Tour de Mont Blanc is certainly one of Europe's best-known mountains, and it's one of these sort of walks that it's not a wilderness walk. You're not walking through remote areas and not seeing people. You know, it's a busy walk. They were seeing lots of people around, but they said they weren't always jammed onto the trail. Joe and Annie did say that they were getting people who were doing just sections or day walks or doing a couple of days on this trip, and as well as other people who are doing the entire trip itself. So it's one of these things, as I mentioned, it's very much a choose your own adventure. It's a matter of what sort of experience you want. And again, it's the sort of thing that I think it's one of these sort of things that most people I have talked to who have done this walk have really enjoyed it. So that's all for this episode, brought to you by Whipper, Australia's pack manufacturer. We hope you've enjoyed hearing about one of Europe's best-known walks, the Tour de Mont Blanc, and you might look at considering it for an option sometime in the future. That's all for me. Bye for now.